According to our information, this house is vacant and the new owners haven't moved in yet. May I see your ID, sir?
Certainly.
The West Oakwood subdivision was less a collection of houses and more a curated ecosystem. Manicured lawns, identical mailboxes approved by the Homeowners Association, and the hushed, almost reverent quiet of a weekday morning. For Brenda Hatcher, this ecosystem was her life's work. At 38, with a sharp, angular face and eyes that seemed to be in a perpetual state of scanning, she moved through the neighborhood not as a resident, but as a warden. Her uniform was a crisp Lululemon tracksuit, her chariot a silent pearl-white hybrid SUV that ghosted along the asphalt with predatory grace. From behind the wheel, she observed. A newspaper left on a driveway past 8 a.m., a recycling bin put out a day too early, a child's bicycle left ungaraged. Each was a minor tear in the fabric of order, a loose thread she felt compelled to pull. Her creation, the Oakwood Sentinels, was the formal expression of this obsession. It began 5 years ago after a teenager's car was broken into, a minor theft of loose change and sunglasses that Brenda treated as the opening salvo of a barbarian invasion. She had rallied the residents, her voice ringing with the conviction of a seasoned general, speaking of shared values, property values, and the creeping threat of the outside. The result was a neighborhood watch group unlike any other. They didn't just watch, they monitored. They had an encrypted messaging app, a detailed schedule of patrols, which were mostly just residents like Brenda driving around on their way to the grocery store, and a shared cloud document of unfamiliar vehicles, complete with license plate numbers and descriptions of their drivers. It was a fortress of information, and Brenda Hatcher was its queen. This morning the air was thick with the scent of cut grass and the promise of a sweltering Florida afternoon. Brenda was on her second lap, her hybrid's electric motor making no sound to disturb the peace she so fiercely protected. Her phone, mounted on the dashboard, was open to the Sentinel's chat group, a silent stream of morning greetings and an alert about a landscaper's truck that wasn't on the approved vendor list. She had already cross-referenced the company and confirmed they were a new subcontractor for the Millers on Elm Street. Threat neutralized. A small, tight smile touched her lips. This was control. This was security. Her philosophy was simple. Anything out of place was a potential threat until proven otherwise. Familiarity was safety. The unknown was danger. She had cultivated this mindset within the group, turning gentle suburban anxiety into a finely tuned surveillance machine. New residents were vetted with the subtlety of a Cold War interrogation, their habits noted, their visitors cataloged. It wasn't about prejudice, she often told the group in their quarterly meetings held in her immaculate beige-toned living room. It was about patterns. They were simply guardians of the neighborhood's established pattern. As she turned onto Sycamore Lane, the most secluded and affluent street in the subdivision, her eyes narrowed. There, parked halfway down the block, was something that didn't fit the pattern. It was a black SUV, a late-model Lincoln Navigator, gleaming as if it had just been driven off the showroom floor. Its windows were tinted, its posture on the curb confident, almost arrogant. It was parked perfectly legally, but it was an unknown, a variable in an equation she had worked tirelessly to solve. She slowed her own vehicle to a crawl, her gaze sweeping the area. The house it was parked in front of belonged to the Carltons, an elderly couple who had moved to a retirement community in Arizona last month. The house was sold, but the new owners weren't supposed to move in for another 2 weeks. She knew this because she had personally spoken to the realtor, a woman she now had on a first-name basis. So why was this vehicle here? Her fingers tapped the screen of her phone, her thumb hovering over the camera icon. She took a quick, clear photo of the SUV, making sure to capture the license plate. Then, she opened the Sentinel's chat. Her pulse quickened, not with fear, but with a familiar, exhilarating sense of purpose. It was the feeling a sentinel gets when they spot a flicker of movement on a quiet horizon. She wasn't just a homeowner in a tracksuit, she was the first line of defense, the guardian at the gate, and a stranger had just appeared at her gate, unannounced and unaccounted for. She began to type, her words precise and loaded with an authority she had created for herself. The ecosystem was about to be tested, and she, its self-appointed protector, was ready. The message landed in the Oakwood Sentinel's chat group with the digital weight of a thrown stone. It was from Brenda, of course. It always started with Brenda. Brenda Hatcher. Image of a black Lincoln Navigator. Morning, Sentinels. Unfamiliar black Navigator parked on Sycamore, in front of the old Carlton place. Tinted windows. Anyone recognize it? Inside the Navigator, David Sutton loosened his tie. The air conditioning was fighting a losing battle against the mounting Florida humidity. He was on a conference call with his old command staff from his previous precinct, a final handover of a complex RICO case he'd been building for the better part of a year. And make sure you cross-reference the financials with the wiretap transcripts from March, he instructed, his voice a low, calm baritone. The money trail is there. You just have to connect the dots for the grand jury. He was 51 years old with a neatly trimmed salt and pepper beard and a physique that spoke of disciplined early morning workouts. His face was a landscape of experience, etched with the faint lines of a man who had seen more of the world's troubles than most. After 30 years in law enforcement, rising through the ranks from a beat cop to a deputy chief in a major metropolitan department, he had accepted the position of chief of police in this quieter, sun-drenched city. It was supposed to be the capstone of his career, a place to mentor, to build community bridges, and maybe, just maybe, to lower his blood pressure by a few points. He had closed on the house on Sycamore Lane a week early. The movers weren't coming for another 10 days, but he'd driven down to get the utilities transferred and to meet with a contractor about renovating the kitchen. He'd arrived 20 minutes early for his appointment. Rather than sit in the empty house, he decided to finish his work call in the comfort of his car. He was, for all intents and purposes, a man at his new home, minding his own business. He was unaware of the digital storm brewing just a few dozen yards away. In the Sentinel's chat, Brenda's message was quickly followed by a flurry of replies. Donna Gable. Definitely don't recognize it. Looks expensive. The Carlton place is empty, right? Very strange. Donna was Brenda's most loyal lieutenant, a woman who saw suspicion in every shadow. Kevin Finch. Could be the contractor? For the new owners? Kevin was the group's token voice of reason, a role he played with increasing weariness. He was a retired engineer who had joined the group for a sense of community, but was growing tired of the constant low-grade paranoia. Brenda Hatcher. Contractor was scheduled for 10 a.m. It's 9:40, and they usually drive work vans or trucks, not a brand-new luxury SUV. The optics are off, Kevin. Optics. It was one of Brenda's favorite words. It allowed her to frame her gut feelings in the language of objective analysis. David ended his call. All right, team, keep me posted. And good luck. He tossed his phone onto the passenger seat and stretched, his broad shoulders pressing against the leather. He glanced at the house. It was a handsome brick colonial, solid and unassuming. It was the kind of house where he and his wife could finally host Thanksgiving for their grown children, the kind of place that felt permanent. He was looking forward to being a neighbor, to joining the local book club, to a life where his biggest daily conflict might be a dispute over lawn maintenance. He didn't notice the white hybrid SUV that had passed by his car 3 times in the last 5 minutes, its driver's face a mask of intense concentration. He didn't see the curtains twitching in the house across the street. He was simply a man waiting for a contractor, lost in a pleasant daydream about his future. Back in the chat, the narrative was solidifying. Mark Peterson. I'm on Elm, can't see it from here, but I'll keep an eye out if he starts moving. Donna Gable. He's just sitting in there? That's the definition of suspicious. Who does that? Just sits in a car on a quiet street? Brenda Hatcher. Exactly, Donna. He's been stationary for at least 10 minutes now. He's watching. But what is he watching for? The Carlton house is empty. Maybe he's watching the house next door. The Lees have that new Porsche. The seed was planted. It was no longer an unknown vehicle. It was a man, sitting, watching. His purpose, as defined by the group, was now implicitly criminal. Kevin Finch tried one last time. Kevin Finch. Maybe he's just early for a meeting and on the phone. Happens all the time. Brenda Hatcher. In a normal neighborhood, maybe, but we have a standard here. We don't just wait and see. We are proactive. I'm keeping my eyes on him. Someone needs to. The conversation continued, a cascade of affirmations and escalating concern. The black SUV was no longer a piece of metal and glass. It had been transformed into a symbol. It was a threat, an anomaly in their perfect ecosystem. And the man inside, a stranger about whom they knew nothing, had already been cast as the villain in a drama he didn't even know he was a part of. The encrypted chat was an echo chamber, and Brenda Hatcher was the one who controlled the sound. Every message she sent was designed to amplify her initial suspicion, transforming possibility into probability, and probability into accepted fact. She understood the psychology of the group perfectly. They weren't bad people, they were fearful people. Fearful of crime, fearful of their property values dropping, fearful of a world they saw on the news encroaching on their tranquil oasis. Brenda didn't create that fear, but she knew how to cultivate and direct it. Brenda Hatcher. Still no movement. He's been there for 15 minutes. The contractor, a Mr. Henderson, is now officially 5 minutes late. This isn't adding up. She deliberately used the contractor's name, which she had gotten from the realtor, to show she had done her homework. It made her seem diligent, and her conclusions more credible. Donna Gable. So the contractor story is out. I knew it felt wrong. This is exactly how it starts. They case a neighborhood first. See the patterns. Who leaves for work when? Who gets deliveries? David Sutton, inside his navigator, scrolled through emails on his phone. He'd just received a welcome message from the city manager with a link to the city's internal portal. He was reading through the organizational chart, familiarizing himself with the names of his new department heads. He was absorbed, focused, the picture of a man at work. To the Sentinels, this stillness was proof of his malevolent intent. Kevin Finch. Brenda, has anyone actually seen the person inside? All we're looking at is a car. It was a logical question, a pinprick of reason in a balloon of paranoia. But Brenda was ready. Brenda Hatcher. That's part of the problem, Kevin. The windows are heavily tinted. It's impossible to get a clear look at the driver. That's a tactic. They don't want to be identified. This was a masterful pivot. A lack of information wasn't a reason to be cautious. It was evidence of criminal sophistication. She was teaching them to see absence as a threat. David put his phone down and rubbed his eyes. He glanced at his watch. 10:05 a.m. The contractor was late. He sighed. This was the part of homeownership he didn't miss. He decided to get out and stretch his legs. The door of the navigator opened with a soft, expensive thud. For the first time, the Sentinels had a visual on their subject. Brenda, parked 50 yards down the street, zoomed in with her phone's camera. The picture was grainy, but the details were clear enough. Brenda Hatcher. Subject is out of the vehicle. Adult male, black, early 50s, dressed in a suit. Doesn't fit the profile of a contractor at all. This has gone from suspicious to a genuine red flag, people. The inclusion of the man's race, dropped into the chat with clinical precision, was the spark that lit the fuse. Until now, the threat had been a faceless, genderless driver in a vehicle. Now it had a demographic. It activated a deeper, more primal set of anxieties within the group. Biases they would never admit to in public, but which hummed beneath the surface of their suburban lives. Donna Gable. A suit? He's definitely not here to check on the plumbing. This is bad. This is very bad. Brenda, what's the protocol here? Mark Peterson. My wife just saw him. She said he's just standing there looking at the houses, like he's picking one. David was, in fact, looking at the houses. He was admiring the architecture, the mature oak trees that gave the subdivision its name. He was imagining his wife planting hydrangeas in the front garden bed of their new home. He took a slow walk down the sidewalk, his hands in his pockets, enjoying the morning sun. He looked at the house next door, noting its well-maintained roof. He glanced across the street at a home with an elaborate fountain, making a mental note that his new neighbors had taste. To a casual observer, he was a man appreciating his new surroundings. To the sentinels, watching from their windows and through the lens of Brenda's phone, his every glance was an act of assessment, a predator sizing up its prey. Brenda Hatcher. Okay, team, I've seen enough. He is systematically surveying the street. He's trying to appear casual, but it's obvious. He's a professional. He's looking for security cameras, weak spots, signs of occupancy. Kevin Finch. Or he's the new owner looking at his neighborhood. Brenda Hatcher. Kevin, the house is empty and the owners aren't due for 2 weeks. I confirmed it. He has no legitimate reason to be here, dressed like that, acting like this. We are past the point of giving him the benefit of the doubt. It's time to escalate. The safety of this community is my #1 priority. Her declaration was met with a chorus of digital agreement. Likes, thumbs-up emojis, and messages of, "You're doing the right thing, Brenda," and "Thank God for the Sentinels." Kevin Finch's lone voice of dissent was drowned out. The echo chamber had done its work. An innocent man enjoying the morning air on the street of his new home had been tried and convicted in a court of whispers and pixels. The verdict was in. He was a threat. And now, the sentence was about to be carried out. The decision was made. Brenda felt a familiar surge of adrenaline, the kind that came when her convictions were validated by the group. This wasn't just her opinion anymore. It was the consensus of the Oakwood Sentinels. She was now acting with a mandate. She pulled her hybrid SUV over to the curb, parking under the shade of a large oak tree, far enough away not to be noticed, but close enough to maintain a clear line of sight to the black Navigator. She took a moment to compose herself, her breathing slow and steady. The call had to be handled perfectly. She couldn't sound hysterical or panicked. She needed to project an image of a calm, concerned citizen representing a well-organized community. She didn't dial 911. That was for emergencies, for crimes in progress. A 911 call would be scrutinized, and it might make her seem like an alarmist. Instead, she dialed the police department's non-emergency number, a line she had saved in her contacts as PD Dispatch. It was a subtle distinction, but an important one. It suggested a situation that was controlled, observed, and required a measured response rather than a frantic one. The phone rang twice before a placid female voice answered. "Police Department, non-emergency line. How may I help you?" "Good morning," Brenda began, her voice a carefully modulated instrument of civic concern. "My name is Brenda Hatcher. I'm the coordinator for the West Oakwood Neighborhood Watch Program, the Oakwood Sentinels." She always started by identifying her role. It lent her an immediate air of authority, transforming her from a random caller into a quasi-official partner in law enforcement. "Okay, Ms. Hatcher, what can I do for you?" the dispatcher asked, her tone still neutral but now slightly more attentive. "We have a situation developing here on Sycamore Lane," Brenda said, choosing her words with precision. "For the past 25 minutes, we've had a suspicious vehicle parked on the street. It's a black Lincoln Navigator, late model, heavily tinted windows. It's parked in front of a home that is currently vacant." She paused, letting the key details sink in. Suspicious, tinted windows, vacant home. Each was a piece of a carefully constructed puzzle designed to lead to one conclusion. "There is an adult male driver," she continued. "We've observed him exit the vehicle. He's been walking up and down the street very slowly, surveying the homes in the area. Our community members are quite concerned. His behavior is consistent with someone casing homes for a potential burglary." She didn't say, "He's a black man in a suit who looks out of place." That would be crude, the kind of statement that could be flagged as a biased call. Instead, she used the sanitized, procedural language she had learned from watching countless crime dramas. Consistent with someone casing homes. It was an assessment, not an accusation. It sounded professional. "Can you describe the man, ma'am?" the dispatcher asked. "He's a black male, approximately 50 years of age, well-dressed in a business suit, which is frankly part of what makes this so unusual. It doesn't seem to fit any benign explanation. She delivered the description as a simple fact, embedded within the larger context of suspicious behavior. And he's not threatening anyone or trying to open doors? No, nothing overt, Brenda conceded, framing her honesty as a sign of her reliability. It's more a pattern of behavior that has put the entire street on high alert. He seems to be paying very close attention to security systems and points of entry. Several of our members have reported feeling very uneasy. We feel a wellness check at the very least would be prudent to ensure the security of the neighborhood. Wellness check. It was another brilliant piece of jargon. It sounded less confrontational than send a cop to question him. It implied her motive was care, not suspicion. Okay, Ms. Hatcher, I have the details. Black navigator on Sycamore Lane. Male subject surveying homes. Can you confirm the address? Brenda gave the address of the vacant Carlton house. I'll remain on scene from a safe distance to provide updates if he moves. The Oakwood Sentinels appreciate the department's responsiveness. We'll dispatch a unit to check it out, Ms. Hatcher. Thank you for your vigilance. The call ended. Brenda took a deep breath, a profound sense of satisfaction washing over her. She had done it. She had translated the vague anxieties of her neighbors into a coherent, actionable police report. She had set the wheels of officialdom in motion. She opened the Sentinel's chat and typed a new message. Brenda Hatcher. Update. I have spoken with PD Dispatch. A unit is en route to investigate the situation. Stay vigilant and report any changes in the subject's behavior. We did the right thing. Her phone immediately lit up with praise. You're amazing, Brenda. Thank you for protecting us. So glad you're in charge. She smiled. The system was working. Her system. Across the street, David Sutton had just gotten off the phone with the contractor, who was apologetic and promised to be there in 10 minutes. Unaware of the forces converging on his location, he leaned against his new SUV, enjoying the warmth of the sun on his face, a man at peace in his new neighborhood. He had no idea he was now officially a subject, the target of an investigation he had unknowingly provoked simply by existing in the wrong place at the wrong time, under the watchful, unforgiving eyes of the Oakwood Sentinels. The patrol car rolled onto Sycamore Lane with the quiet efficiency of routine. It didn't use its sirens or flashing lights. This was a low-priority check-on call, not a hot pursuit. Inside were Officer Miller, a 10-year veteran with a calm, seen-it-all demeanor, and his partner, Officer Thompson, younger, sharper, and still possessing a rookie's eagerness to prove himself. Miller was driving. All right, what we got, Tommy? Miller asked, his eyes scanning the street. Call came in from a Brenda Hatcher, head of the local neighborhood watch, Thompson said, reading from the laptop mounted between them. Black navigator, tinted windows, parked in front of a vacant house. Male subject, black, 50s, in a suit, reportedly casing the neighborhood. Caller says the whole street is on high alert. He put a slight, almost imperceptible sarcastic spin on the last two words. Neighborhood watch calls were a mixed bag. Some were legitimate tips, but most were products of boredom and bias. Hatcher, Miller grunted. I know that name. She calls about once a month. Overzealous, but her paperwork is always tidy. He spotted the navigator. There's our guy. David Sutton saw the patrol car approach in his peripheral vision. He felt no alarm, no anxiety. Police cars were a part of his world, as familiar as his own reflection. He straightened up from leaning against his SUV, his posture relaxed but attentive. He instinctively understood that his next few moments would be defined by how he presented himself. 30 years of law enforcement had taught him that the first 30 seconds of any encounter were the most critical. Miller pulled the patrol car to a smooth stop about 20 feet behind the navigator, using the classic offset position that gave both officers a clear line of sight and tactical cover. They got out of the car, their movements fluid and practiced. They didn't draw their weapons, but their hands were near their belts, a posture of relaxed readiness. Morning, sir, Miller said, his voice polite but firm. He stopped about 10 feet away, creating a comfortable reactionary gap. Thompson moved slightly off to the side, taking up a support position. "I'm Officer Miller. This is Officer Thompson. We got a call about a suspicious vehicle in the area." David met their gaze, his expression neutral. "Good morning, officers. Is there a problem?" He didn't make any sudden movements. He kept his hands visible, away from his pockets. He was playing the part of the compliant citizen perfectly because he knew the script by heart. He'd been on their side of this exact conversation 1,000 times. "Just doing our due diligence, sir," Thompson said. "The vehicle isn't familiar to the residents, and it's parked in front of a house that's supposed to be empty. Can I ask what your business is here on Sycamore Lane?" "Of course," David said calmly. "I'm waiting for a contractor. He's running a few minutes late." "A contractor for which residence?" Miller asked, his eyes taking in David's expensive suit, his polished shoes, the high-end SUV. The dispatcher's report was accurate. He did not look like a tradesman. "This one," David said, nodding toward the former Carlton house. Miller and Thompson exchanged a quick, subtle glance. The story wasn't quite aligning with the facts they'd been given. "According to our information, this house is vacant, and the new owners haven't moved in yet," Miller stated, his tone still even but with a new edge of questioning. "May I see your ID, sir?" "Certainly," David said. He slowly reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket, announcing his movement beforehand. "I'm reaching for my wallet now." He pulled out his wallet and handed the officer his driver's license. Miller took it and looked at it. David Sutton. The address was from out of state. He handed the license to Thompson, who walked back to the patrol car to run it through the system. This was standard procedure, a moment designed to let the tension hang in the air, to see if the subject would get nervous. David waited patiently. He knew they were just doing their job, following a script initiated by a phone call. He wasn't angry. If anything, he was a little impressed. The neighborhood watch, for all its potential flaws, was clearly active. "So you're the new owner?" Miller asked, his arms crossed. "Closed last week," David confirmed. "Just came down to get a few things in order before my family and I move in permanently." Thompson returned from the car. He handed the license back to Miller and gave a slight nod. The ID was valid, and there were no warrants. But there was something else. Thompson's eyes were wide, and he looked from the license to David's face with a newfound expression of dawning horror. "Sir," Thompson said, his voice suddenly deferential. "Your name is David Sutton?" "That's right," David said. Miller looked down at the license again, then back up at David. The name suddenly clicked. He'd seen it in a dozen departmental memos over the last month. David Sutton, the new chief of police. He was supposed to start next week. A long, deeply uncomfortable silence fell over the street. The two officers stood frozen, their faces a mixture of shock, embarrassment, and professional dread. They had just been questioning their new boss, the man who would command their entire department, based on a suspicious person call from a neighborhood busybody. Miller swallowed hard, the color draining from his face. "Chief Sutton," he said, the words coming out strained. We had no idea, sir. My apologies." He quickly handed the driver's license back, as if it were a hot coal. David took it and slid it back into his wallet. He gave them a small, tight smile, his eyes betraying nothing but calm professionalism. "No apology necessary, Officer Miller," he said, his voice even. "You were responding to a call from a citizen. You were doing your job. Your conduct was professional. Now, if we're done here, I believe my contractor is finally arriving." He nodded down the street, where a dusty work van was now pulling up to the curb. The officers, looking profoundly relieved, could only nod in return. The tense standoff had dissolved into a moment of excruciating awkwardness. The subject was not only innocent, but he was the most powerful law enforcement officer in the city. Brenda Hatcher watched the entire interaction from her vantage point down the street, her phone recording a shaky, long-distance video. She couldn't hear the words, but she could read the body language. She saw the initial, cautious approach of the officers. She saw the man hand over his identification. She saw one officer go back to the patrol car. This was all textbook. It was working. Her report was being taken seriously. Then she saw the shift. The second officer returned, and the entire posture of the two policemen changed. They went from being authoritative to being deferential. They handed the ID back quickly. There was a brief exchange, and then the officers got back in their car and drove away, just as a contractor's van was pulling up. The man, the subject, gestured to the contractor and they began talking by the front door of the house. From Brenda's perspective, the sequence of events was clear. The Sentinels had identified a threat. They had reported it. The police had responded, confronted the individual, and he had subsequently been forced to reveal his, supposedly, legitimate business. The fact that a contractor showed up immediately after the police left was, in her mind, proof that their intervention had prevented something. Perhaps the man had been forced to call a real contractor to create a cover story. Or perhaps his presence had scared off other, less visible threats. The exact details didn't matter. What mattered was the outcome. The unknown was gone, and order was restored. She ended her recording and immediately opened the Sentinel's chat. Her fingers flew across the screen, crafting the narrative of their victory. Brenda Hatcher. All clear. Update from Sycamore Lane. PD responded within minutes. 2 officers made contact with the subject. After a brief conversation, the subject was identified and the officers departed. The subject is now meeting with a contractor who arrived on scene after the police presence. Mission accomplished, Sentinels. She read the message over once. It was perfect. It implied a cause and effect that didn't exist, and it ended with the triumphant finality of a military commander. Donna Gable. Yes, that's what I'm talking about. See? When we stick together, we get results. They know they can't get away with anything in Oakwood. Mark Peterson. Great work, Brenda. You handled that perfectly. I feel safer already. The chat filled with a cascade of praise and self-congratulation. They had faced the unknown and, with the help of law enforcement, had beaten it back. They had proven the system worked. Their system. Kevin Finch. So, who was he? Did the police say? Brenda paused. She didn't actually know. The officers hadn't spoken to her, they had just driven away. Admitting this would introduce a note of uncertainty into her perfect narrative of success. She couldn't have that. Brenda Hatcher. Kevin, the important thing is that the situation is resolved. The police were satisfied and he is no longer a threat. His specific identity is less important than the fact that our vigilance worked. This was a textbook example of community policing in action. We saw something, we said something, and it was handled. It was a brilliant deflection. She elevated the conversation from the specific, the identity of one man, to the abstract principle of their group's effectiveness. She was telling them not to worry about the details, but to focus on the victory. Donna Gable. Brenda's right, Kevin. We showed them we're watching. That's the whole point. It's about sending a message. Don't mess with Oakwood. Brenda leaned back in her seat, a deep, genuine smile spreading across her face as she read the messages of support. This was why she did it. This feeling of validation, of being essential. She had taken a simple, mundane event, a man waiting in a car, and transformed it into a dramatic saga of community defense. She had created a villain, summoned the cavalry, and declared victory. In her mind, she wasn't a nosy neighbor who had just sicked the cops on an innocent man. She was a hero. She had protected her people. She started her hybrid and pulled away from the curb, driving past the navigator and the contractor's van. She caught a glimpse of David Sutton in her rearview mirror. He was laughing with the contractor, pointing at the kitchen window. He looked relaxed, happy. He looked like a man at home. For a fleeting second, a sliver of doubt pierced Brenda's bubble of self-satisfaction. What if the reasonable voice in the chat, what if Kevin had been right? What if he really was just the new owner? She pushed the thought away as quickly as it came. It couldn't be. To admit that would be to admit she had been wrong, that her entire carefully constructed drama was a fiction. It would mean she had harassed an innocent man, wasted police resources, and stoked fear for no reason. It was an unacceptable thought. Her version of the story was better. It was cleaner. It was a story where she was the guardian, the sentinel, the victor. and that was the story she would stick with. A month passed. The incident on Sycamore Lane faded from the forefront of the Sentinel's chat, replaced by the usual stream of suburban minutia. Reports of speeding delivery vans, debates over new HOA landscaping rules, and a lengthy, heated discussion about a teenager's loud party. The victory on Sycamore Lane, as Brenda had framed it, became a piece of established group lore, a testament to their effectiveness and a warning to any would-be troublemakers. Brenda's status as the group's indispensable leader was more secure than ever. She had proven her worth. Life in Oakwood returned to its placid, predictable rhythm. The house on Sycamore Lane was no longer empty. A moving van had come and gone. A family was clearly living there now, though no one from the Sentinels had made an effort to introduce themselves. In their minds, the new neighbor had started off on the wrong foot, a subject of an investigation before he was even a person. It was a Tuesday morning when the city's monthly e-newsletter arrived in inboxes across Oakwood. It was a typically dry affair, with updates on road construction, a profile of the library's summer reading program, and a reminder about bulk trash pickup days. Most residents deleted it without reading, but Brenda Hatcher read it cover to cover. It was, in her view, a form of intelligence gathering. She was sitting at her granite kitchen island, sipping a green tea, scrolling through the newsletter on her iPad. She scanned past an article on water conservation and a photo of the mayor at a ribbon-cutting ceremony. Then she stopped. Her finger froze on the screen. The headline read, "A New Era of Leadership. City welcomes new Chief of Police David Sutton." Beneath the headline was a large, professionally shot photograph. It was a man in a crisp, decorated police uniform, smiling warmly at the camera. He looked authoritative, kind, and confident. But it wasn't his uniform or his smile that made Brenda's breath catch in her throat. It was his face. It was the same face. It was the man from the Black Navigator, the subject, the prowler her group had reported. The man she had personally described to a police dispatcher as Casing Holmes. A cold, heavy sensation spread through her chest. The screen seemed to blur for a moment. She scrolled down, her hands trembling slightly, and read the accompanying article. Chief David Sutton comes to us after a decorated 30-year career, a national expert in community policing. He and his wife, Sarah, are excited to join our community and have recently purchased a home in the West Oakwood subdivision. West Oakwood. The iPad slipped from her fingers and clattered onto the countertop. The sound echoed in the silent kitchen. It couldn't be. It was a nightmare. The man whose very presence she had deemed a threat to their safety was now in charge of the entire city's safety. The man she had treated as a potential criminal was the city's top cop. Her mind raced, frantically trying to reframe the situation, to find an angle, any angle that didn't leave her exposed as a prejudiced fool. But there was no angle. The facts were stark, simple, and horrifying. Her phone began to buzz, a frantic, insistent vibration. It was the Sentinel's chat. Someone else had seen it. She picked up the phone, her thumb shaking as she unlocked it. The chat was exploding. Kevin Finch. Screenshot of the newsletter article. "Is this a joke? Someone please tell me this is a joke." Mark Peterson. "Oh my God, that's him. That's the guy from Sycamore Lane." Donna Gable. "No, no way, it can't be. Are we sure? It might just be someone who looks like him." Kevin Finch. "Donna, it says he just moved into West Oakwood. It's him. We reported the new chief of police as a prowler. Do you understand how bad this is?" The digital panic was palpable. The smug self-satisfaction from a month ago had curdled into sheer terror. They weren't heroes who had protected their neighborhood. They were a group of paranoid homeowners who had harassed the most powerful man in the police department. Their textbook example of community policing was, in reality, a textbook example of racial profiling and baseless hysteria. Brenda stared at the chat, her face pale. Her authority, her reputation, everything she had built was threatening to crumble into dust. Every triumphant message she had typed a month ago now read like an indictment. Every word of praise from her followers felt like a nail in her coffin. She could see it all slipping away. The respect of her neighbors, the credibility of her group, the very foundation of her identity as the protector of Oakwood. She saw the two paths laid out before her. One was the path of humility, an apology, an admission of a terrible mistake, a public retraction. The other path, the one her mind instinctively recoiled towards, was the path of defiance. In her world, admitting a mistake was a sign of weakness. Weakness was a vulnerability, and a sentinel could never, ever be vulnerable. The fear of humiliation was a powerful motivator, stronger even than the fear of being wrong. As she stared at the smiling face of Chief David Sutton on her screen, a new, desperate plan began to form in her mind. A plan born not of malice, but of pure, unadulterated self-preservation. Panic is a catalyst. For some, it leads to paralysis. For others, it sparks a frantic, often misguided course of action. For Brenda Hatcher, panic was a call to arms. The thought of apologizing, of admitting her colossal error to the group and, worse, to the chief of police himself, was physically repulsive to her. It would mean the end of the Oakwood Sentinels as she knew it. It would mean the end of her reign. She would be a laughingstock, the woman who cried wolf at the sheepdog. She spent the rest of the day in a fugue state, ignoring the frantic spiral of the group chat. She let them panic. Her silence, she knew, would be interpreted as contemplative, as a sign that their leader was formulating a strategy. And she was. As her husband and children moved through the house that evening, she sat at her desk, the glow of her laptop illuminating her face in the dark. She was not drafting an apology, she was drafting a complaint. The logic in her panicked mind was flawless. She couldn't change the facts, they had reported him, but she could change the narrative. She could reframe the reason for their suspicion. It wasn't because he was an unfamiliar black man in an expensive car, it was because of his behavior. If she could paint Chief Sutton's actions during that encounter as unprofessional, intimidating, or threatening, then their reaction would seem justified, even prescient. It would transform them from biased alarmists into concerned citizens who had rightfully questioned an abuse of power. The best defense, she had always believed, was a strong offense. She began to type, her fingers clicking with renewed purpose. The document was a formal complaint addressed to the city manager, with a copy to be sent to the head of the city council. "Dear City Manager Thompson," she began, "I am writing to you today not only as a concerned citizen, but as the coordinator of the Oakwood Sentinels, a community watch program with over 150 active members. It is with a heavy heart that I must file a formal complaint regarding the conduct of the newly appointed Chief of Police, Mr. David Sutton." She paused, rereading the sentence. Heavy heart. It was the perfect touch of feigned reluctance. 1 month ago, prior to the public announcement of his appointment, our organization observed Mr. Sutton engaging in highly suspicious behavior on Sycamore Lane. Our members, trained to recognize potential threats, reported his activities. When 2 of your finest officers responded to our call, the situation escalated in a deeply concerning manner. This was the heart of her fabrication. She began to weave a new version of the encounter, one built on half-truths and outright lies. While Mr. Sutton was not overtly aggressive, she typed, his demeanor was immediately intimidating and non-compliant. He was dismissive of the officer's questions and projected an air of arrogance, as if he were above the law. He seemed to take issue with being questioned, and his hostile attitude created a tense and uncomfortable atmosphere for everyone involved, including the neighbors who witnessed the event. She remembered the way the officers' postures had changed. In reality, it was deference. In her new story, it became fear. Our members observed that the responding officers seemed cowed by Mr. Sutton's belligerent attitude. It appeared to us that he used his status, which was unknown to us at the time, to intimidate the officers into abandoning their investigation prematurely. They left the scene without resolving the community's initial concerns, leaving our residents feeling vulnerable and unprotected. It was a work of art, a masterpiece of manipulation. She was turning their mistake into his failing. They weren't wrong to report him, the police were wrong to back down from him. She was no longer the villain of the story. She was a whistleblower, a citizen standing up to a powerful official who was abusing his authority before he even officially started his job. She spent 2 hours refining the letter, adding details, polishing the language, infusing it with the tone of a reluctant but duty-bound public servant. She mentioned the safety of our children and the integrity of our police department. She positioned herself and the Sentinels not as antagonists, but as partners in accountability. We believe a man who behaves with such dismissiveness and intimidation toward his own officers when he thinks no one knows who he is cannot be trusted to lead the department with fairness and impartiality, she wrote in her concluding paragraph. We respectfully request a full and transparent investigation into this incident. The citizens of this city deserve to have confidence in their chief of police, and based on our direct experience, that confidence has been severely undermined. She signed it, Brenda Hatcher, Coordinator, Oakwood Sentinels. She saved the document and then opened the Sentinels chat group for the first time all day. The panic had subsided into a kind of sullen resignation. Brenda Hatcher. Sentinels, I have been working on a solution. An apology is an admission of guilt, and we are not guilty of protecting our neighborhood. We acted on the information we had. The fault lies not with us, but with the unprofessional conduct of the subject in question. I have drafted a formal complaint to the city manager demanding an investigation. We will not be intimidated. We will not be made to feel like we did something wrong. We will stand our ground. The effect was instantaneous. The mood in the chat shifted from fear to a kind of defiant euphoria. Brenda had given them a new narrative, a way out. They weren't fools, they were victims. They weren't prejudiced, they were principled. Donna Gable. This is why you're our leader, Brenda. You're absolutely right. He was arrogant. We will not back down. Brenda closed her laptop, a grim sense of triumph settling over her. She had stared into the abyss of public humiliation and had clawed her way back out. She had taken a losing hand and bluffed her way into a position of power. She had no idea that her meticulously crafted fiction was about to collide with a far more powerful and unforgiving version of the truth, the unblinking digital eye of a police body camera. Chief David Sutton was in his new office, a spacious room with a large window overlooking the City Hall Plaza. Boxes were still stacked in the corners, but he had already placed a framed photo of his wife and their 2 grown children on his desk. He was spending his first official week on the job in a series of back-to-back meetings, getting to know his command staff, the mayor, and the heads of various city departments. He was energized, full of ideas for new community outreach programs, improved officer training, and a data-driven approach to reducing crime. He was building a foundation for his legacy. On Thursday morning, he received a summons to the office of City Manager George Thompson, a silver-haired, perpetually weary man who had seen his fair share of municipal crises. The meeting was unscheduled, the tone of the email curt. David felt a flicker of apprehension. This wasn't a welcome aboard coffee chat. He walked into George's office. The city manager was sitting behind his large mahogany desk, his expression grim. He didn't get up. He gestured to the chair opposite him. "David, thanks for coming on such short notice," George began, foregoing any pleasantries. "We have a situation, a rather delicate one." He slid a document across the desk. It was a printed email, and attached to it was a 2-page letter. David picked it up. The letterhead was from something called the Oakwood Sentinels. He began to read. As his eyes moved across the page, his expression remained impassive, a disciplined mask honed by decades of dealing with high-stress situations. But inwardly, a storm was brewing. He read the carefully chosen words. Highly suspicious behavior, intimidating and non-compliant, dismissive of the officer's questions, hostile attitude, belligerent. He read the accusation that he had used his status to intimidate the officers and the demand for a full and transparent investigation. It was a complete and utter fabrication, a work of fiction so audacious, so divorced from the reality of the calm, professional 5-minute encounter that he felt a moment of genuine disbelief. He had been expecting a quiet, perhaps embarrassed apology to eventually make its way to him through back channels. He had never, in his wildest imagination, expected this. An all-out declaration of war. He finished the letter and placed it carefully back on the desk. He looked at George, his gaze steady. "I see," was all he said. George Thompson leaned forward, his hands clasped on the desk. "David, I'll be blunt. This is a political nightmare. Brenda Hatcher and her group are very vocal. They show up to every city council meeting. They have the ear of a certain segment of the population. An official complaint against a new police chief, before you've even had a chance to unpack your office, is poison. It creates a narrative of instability. The media would have a field day with this." David remained silent, letting the city manager talk. He needed to understand the political landscape before he made his move. "Ordinarily," George continued, "I might be able to bury this, but she copied Councilwoman Peters, who, as you'll soon learn, lives for this kind of drama. It's on the official record. I have no choice but to launch a formal inquiry. That means Internal Affairs is going to have to open a file on you, on your first week." David felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. An IA file. Even when an officer is exonerated, the file leaves a permanent stain, a shadow of accusation that follows them for their entire career. He had maintained a spotless record for 30 years, and now, thanks to the paranoid delusions of a suburban vigilante, that record was about to be blemished. "I understand the position you're in, George," David said, his voice a low, controlled rumble. "Launch the investigation. I have nothing to hide." George looked surprised. He had expected anger, denial, a demand to shut it down. "Are you sure? It could get messy." "I am the chief of police," David said, a hard edge creeping into his voice for the first time. "I am subject to the same rules and procedures as every other officer in this department. If a citizen files a formal complaint, it must be investigated thoroughly and impartially. That is the only way to maintain the public's trust. I welcome it." He was not just giving the politically correct answer, he was setting a trap. Brenda Hatcher and her sentinels believed this would be a battle of her word against his. They believed they could control the narrative. They had made a critical, catastrophic error. They had forgotten about the third party in that encounter, the silent, objective witness. "There's one more thing, George," David said as he stood to leave. "The two officers who responded to that call, what are their names?" "Miller and Thompson," George said, consulting the report. "Make sure their body camera footage from that day is pulled and logged as evidence immediately. Unedited. Chain of custody, fully documented." A look of understanding dawned on George Thompson's face. "The body cameras. Of course. I want Internal Affairs to have every second of that interaction," David continued, his voice now devoid of any emotion. "I also want them to subpoena the chat logs from this Oakwood Sentinels group, as well as the recording of the initial call to dispatch. Let's see if Ms. Hatcher's official story matches the one she told her friends in the heat of the moment." He turned and walked toward the door. "Let the investigation run its course. I have full confidence that the truth will come out." He left the city manager's office and walked back to his own, his stride purposeful. The initial shock had been replaced by a cold, clear resolve. This was no longer just a personal annoyance. It was an attack on his integrity, on the integrity of his office. Brenda Hatcher had wanted a fight. He was going to give her one. But they wouldn't be fighting with opinions and accusations. They would be fighting with facts. And he knew with absolute certainty that the facts were on his side. This wasn't his first battle, and he had no intention of losing it. The Internal Affairs Division of the police department was housed in the basement of the headquarters, a location that was both physically and metaphorically appropriate. It was a place of quiet, methodical scrutiny where careers were saved or shattered. The investigation into the complaint against Chief Sutton was assigned to Sergeant Frank Davis, a man who fit the IA mold perfectly. He was in his late 50s, with a perpetually tired expression, a meticulous nature, and a profound lack of sentimentality. He had investigated dirty cops, heroic cops, and foolish cops. To him, everyone was a subject, and every story was a potential fiction until proven otherwise by objective evidence. His first step was to build what he called the digital container for the case. This was the collection of all electronic evidence related to the incident, gathered before any interviews were conducted. He wanted the unvarnished truth before it could be contaminated by memory, justification, or outright lies. First, he retrieved the audio file of Brenda Hatcher's call to the non-emergency line. He sat in his small, windowless office, put on a pair of headphones, and listened. He heard Brenda's calm, measured voice, the carefully chosen, sanitized language. Consistent with someone casing homes. Pattern of behavior. Wellness check. Davis had heard hundreds of calls like this. He recognized the tone of someone trying to sound official while reporting something based on a gut feeling. It was professional-sounding bias. He saved the file. Next, he submitted a formal request to the department's tech division for the body camera footage from officers Miller and Thompson for the specified date and time. Within an hour, the encrypted video files were in his case folder. This was the centerpiece of the investigation. The unblinking, impartial witness. He wouldn't watch it yet. He wanted to collect the other pieces first, to see the narrative the complainant had built before he saw the reality the camera had captured. The most challenging piece to acquire was the chat log. The Oakwood Sentinels used an encrypted messaging app. Getting a warrant for the records would be time-consuming and would tip off the group that a serious investigation was underway. Davis decided on a different approach. He looked up the group's roster, which Brenda had helpfully alluded to in her complaint. He found the name Kevin Finch. A quick background check showed a retired electrical engineer with a clean record and no history of nuisance calls to the police. He seemed like the most level-headed member of the bunch. Davis made a phone call. "Mr. Finch, this is Sergeant Davis with the Police Department's Internal Affairs Division. I'm conducting an inquiry into a citizen's complaint, and your name has come up as a potential witness. I'd like to ask you a few questions if you have a moment. This is a voluntary conversation." Kevin Finch, on the other end of the line, was terrified. He agreed immediately. Davis met him for coffee at a neutral location downtown. The sergeant was disarmingly calm. He explained that a formal complaint had been filed regarding the incident on Sycamore Lane. "I just want to get a sense of the situation from your perspective, Mr. Finch," Davis said, stirring his coffee. "I understand there was some discussion within your neighborhood watch group prior to the call being placed." Kevin, relieved that he wasn't the one in trouble, began to talk. He described his own skepticism, the group's escalating paranoia, and Brenda's role in steering the conversation. "She's a good person," Kevin said, hedging. "She's just very passionate about safety." "I understand," Davis said, his expression unreadable. "This complaint alleges that the subject of the call, Chief Sutton, was intimidating and hostile toward the responding officers. Does that align with what you saw?" Kevin hesitated. "I didn't see it up close, but that doesn't sound right. The whole thing felt off." "Mr. Finch, for me to get a clear picture, it would be immensely helpful to see the conversation as it unfolded, to understand the context. Would you be willing to provide a copy of your group's chat history for that day?" Davis knew it was a long shot. It required the man to betray the trust of his group. But he also knew that Kevin was a man caught between his loyalty to a flawed leader and his own conscience. Kevin thought for a moment. He remembered the unease he felt, the way his reasonable objections were shouted down. He remembered the sick feeling in his stomach when he saw the newsletter. Brenda had gone too far. This wasn't about safety anymore. It was about her ego. "Okay," Kevin said quietly. "I'll do it. But you didn't get it from me." "I'll receive an anonymous tip with the files attached," Davis said with a slight nod. "Thank you for your cooperation, Mr. Finch." 2 hours later, a zip file arrived in Davis's inbox from an anonymous encrypted email address. It contained screenshots of the entire chat conversation from that morning. Davis opened the first image. He saw Brenda's initial post. He saw Kevin's attempts at reason. He saw Donna's fear-mongering. and he saw Brenda's masterful manipulation, culminating in the racially charged description of the subject. He read the triumphant celebration after the police left. He compared it to the formal, sanctimonious tone of her official complaint. The two documents did not align. One was a story of prejudiced panic. The other was a story of civic duty. Now he had all the pieces: the call, the chat log, the official complaint. He leaned back in his chair and finally opened the body camera footage. It was time to see what really happened on Sycamore Lane. It was time for the unblinking digital eye to deliver its verdict. The setting for an internal affairs interview is designed to be sterile and intimidating. Officer Miller and Officer Thompson were interviewed separately, each sitting in the same hard-backed chair across a metal table from Sergeant Davis. A single, unobtrusive camera was mounted on the wall, and a digital recorder sat on the table between them. The message was clear: everything you say is on the record. Officer Miller went first. He was a cop from the old school, a man who trusted his gut and valued loyalty. He was nervous. Being questioned by IA was never a good sign, and this involved the new chief. He worried he'd done something wrong, that he'd somehow mishandled the call. "Officer Miller," Davis began, his voice flat, "we're here to discuss the call you responded to on Sycamore Lane approximately 1 month ago. A suspicious person call that originated from a Ms. Brenda Hatcher. Do you recall the incident?" "Yes, Sergeant, I do," Miller said. "Walk me through it, from the moment you arrived on scene." Miller recounted the events exactly as they happened. He described their cautious approach, their professional interaction with the man who would turn out to be Chief Sutton, and the dawning, horrifying realization of who they were dealing with. He was honest and direct. "So at any point during your interaction did you find Chief Sutton to be, and I'm quoting from the official complaint here, intimidating, non-compliant, or hostile?" Davis asked, his eyes fixed on Miller. Miller looked genuinely confused. "Hostile? No, sir, absolutely not. He was the opposite. Calm, compliant. He did exactly what we'd want any citizen to do. Kept his hands visible, answered our questions, provided his ID without any argument. Honestly, he was more professional than most people we deal with on a traffic stop." "The complaint alleges that he used his status to intimidate you into abandoning your investigation," Davis pressed. A short, humorless laugh escaped Miller's lips. "He never mentioned his status. We didn't know who he was until my partner ran his license. The investigation ended because there was nothing to investigate. The man owned the house he was parked in front of. It was a baseless call. As soon as we realized who he was, we apologized for bothering him and cleared the scene." "And did he accept your apology?" "He told us not to apologize," Miller said, a note of respect in his voice. "He said we were just doing our jobs. Frankly, Sergeant, he handled it with a lot more grace than I would have." Davis made a few notes. "Thank you, Officer Miller. That will be all for now." Next came Officer Thompson. He was younger, more by the book, and visibly more anxious than his partner. To him, this interview felt like a career-defining test. Davis ran him through the same sequence of questions. Thompson's account mirrored Miller's almost word for word. He described Chief Sutton's calm demeanor and professional compliance. When Davis got to the specific allegations from Brenda Hatcher's complaint, Thompson's response was even more emphatic. "Hostile? Sir, that's just a lie," he said, shaking his head in disbelief. "I was the one who ran his ID. When I saw the name and the memo about his appointment popped up on the system, my heart just about stopped. I thought for sure we were both going to be fired. When I walked back and told my partner, we were expecting him to tear us a new one. Any other high-ranking official would have." "And what did he do?" Davis asked. "He told us we'd conducted ourselves professionally," Thompson said. "He basically gave our handling of the call a pass. It was the most relieved I've ever been on the job. The idea that he was intimidating it's insane. The only people who were intimidated in that situation were me and my partner after we figured out who he was." Davis listened patiently, his face betraying no reaction. He had their statements. Two sworn police officers interviewed separately, telling the exact same story. A story that directly contradicted every substantive claim in Brenda Hatcher's complaint. Their testimony alone was enough to gut her credibility. But he had an ace in the hole. "Officer Thompson," Davis said, leaning forward slightly, "I'm going to show you something. This is the footage from your body camera from that day." He turned a monitor on the table to face the young officer. He clicked a file and the video began to play. The shaky first-person view, the audio of the initial conversation, the calm, deep voice of David Sutton, the polite, professional questions from the officers. The entire 5-minute interaction played out in stark, objective detail. Thompson watched, a strange expression on his face. He was watching himself in a moment of extreme professional stress. The video confirmed everything he and Miller had just said. It showed no hostility, no intimidation, no arrogance. It showed a routine police encounter, handled by the book, that ended with a moment of profound awkwardness. "Does this footage accurately represent the events of that day?" Davis asked when the video ended. "Yes, Sergeant, every second of it," Thompson confirmed. "And does anything in that video support the complainant's claim that Chief Sutton was belligerent or non-compliant?" "No, sir. It proves the exact opposite." Davis nodded slowly. "I agree." He saved his file and shut off the monitor. "Thank you for your time, officer. You may go." Thompson left the room, the weight of the world seemingly lifted from his shoulders. Davis sat alone in the silent room. He now had 4 pillars supporting the truth: the officers' sworn testimony, their body camera footage, the chat logs revealing the complainant's true motivations, and the recording of the initial police call. And on the other side, he had Brenda Hatcher's complaint, a document that was looking less like a legitimate grievance and more like a work of malicious fiction. The investigation was almost complete. There was just one final step. He needed to talk to the author of that fiction. It was time to invite Brenda Hatcher for an interview, and he was going to let her build her entire fantasy, lie by lie, before he systematically tore it all down with the truth. Brenda Hatcher walked into the police headquarters with the unshakable confidence of someone who believes they are on the right side of history. She had dressed for the occasion in a smart navy blue pantsuit, her hair pulled back in a severe professional bun. She carried a leather portfolio containing a copy of her complaint and a list of talking points she had meticulously prepared. In her mind, this interview was not an interrogation. It was a formality. It was her opportunity to present her case to an impartial investigator, to lay out the story of a concerned community standing up to an intimidating official. She believed her version of the story was her most powerful weapon. She was led by a uniformed officer to the basement, to the sterile, unwelcoming corridor of the Internal Affairs Division. The environment was designed to be unsettling, but Brenda felt no fear. She saw it as confirmation of the seriousness of her complaint. She was being taken seriously. Sergeant Davis greeted her with a professional courtesy that she mistook for deference. He introduced himself and led her into the same small, windowless interview room where he had questioned the officers. He offered her a bottle of water, which she accepted. "Thank you for coming in, Ms. Hatcher," Davis began, his voice a neutral monotone as he started the digital recorder. "As you know, I am conducting an inquiry into the complaint you filed regarding an incident on Sycamore Lane involving Chief David Sutton. My goal here is simply to understand your perspective of the events. Please, just walk me through what happened, in your own words." This was the opening Brenda had been waiting for. She sat up straighter, opened her portfolio, and began to recite her narrative. She was an excellent storyteller. She painted a vivid picture of a quiet, peaceful morning shattered by the appearance of a mysterious, threatening vehicle. She described the growing fear among her neighbors, framing their suspicion not as bias, but as a logical response to a series of red flags. "It wasn't just the car, Sergeant," she said, her tone earnest. "It was the whole picture. The tinted windows, the fact that he was parked in front of an empty house. It just felt predatory." She then moved to the heart of her complaint, the encounter with the police. "I watched the entire interaction from a safe distance," she said, leaning forward for emphasis. And while I couldn't hear the words, the body language was deeply troubling. The man, Chief Sutton as we now know, was visibly agitated. He was gesturing sharply. His whole posture was confrontational. The officers, who had initially been so professional, seemed to shrink. They became subservient. Davis listened without interruption, his face a stony mask. He let her talk, occasionally nodding or making a small note on his legal pad. His silence was a canvas onto which Brenda projected her own assumptions. She assumed he was captivated, that he was believing her. She didn't realize that he was simply giving her enough rope to hang herself. And after just a few minutes, they let him go, she continued, her voice rising with indignation. They just got in their car and left. They never even came to speak with me, the original complainant, to tell me the situation was resolved. It felt like a dereliction of duty. It felt like they had been intimidated into dropping the matter. And I have to ask, Sergeant, if this is how he behaves when he thinks he's just an anonymous citizen, how can we trust him to lead with integrity? How can we be sure he won't use his power to bully and intimidate others? She finished her monologue with a flourish, a righteous crusader who had just laid out an irrefutable case for justice. She leaned back in her chair, confident, her work done. She had been persuasive, articulate, and compelling. She had presented a seamless narrative of a powerful man's misconduct and a community's brave response. Thank you, Miss Hatcher. That was very detailed, Davis said, his voice still maddeningly neutral. He steepled his fingers and looked at her, a long, quiet moment passing between them. Brenda's confidence began to waver for the first time. He wasn't acting like an investigator who had just been handed a winning case. He was acting like a predator toying with its food. I just want to clarify a few points to make sure I have the timeline right in my notes, Davis said, his pen hovering over his pad. You stated that the community's concern grew over a period of time based on his behavior of walking up and down the street surveying homes. That's correct, Brenda affirmed. He was systematically casing the street. And your decision to call the police was based on this escalating pattern of suspicious activity? Yes, it was a consensus decision from our group that the situation had reached a point where official intervention was necessary. And your core complaint is about his hostile and intimidating behavior toward the responding officers? That is the crux of the matter, yes, she said, a hint of impatience in her voice. It was all in her letter. Why was he making her repeat it? I see, Davis said slowly. He put down his pen and folded his hands on the table. Ms. Hatcher, I have a few documents here that I'd like to review with you, just to make sure all the facts align. He reached into a file folder and pulled out a stack of papers. On the top was a printed transcript. The air in the room suddenly felt colder. The first crack appeared in Brenda Hatcher's wall of confidence. She had built her story in a vacuum of her own making, and she was about to learn that the real world, with its hard, unforgiving evidence, was about to come crashing in. She had woven her narrative with the confidence of an artist. Now she was about to be confronted by the cold, hard science of an investigation. Ms. Hatcher, this is a transcript of the call you placed to the police non-emergency line that morning, Sergeant Davis said, sliding the paper across the table. I'd like to direct your attention to your description of the subject. You state, and I quote, his behavior is consistent with someone casing homes for a potential burglary. That's a very serious claim. It implies you observed a pattern of criminal intent. Brenda glanced at the paper. As I said, he was surveying the homes, she replied, her voice steady. She would not be shaken. Interesting, Davis said, his voice still deceptively mild. He set another stack of papers next to the first. They were screenshots. Because this is a transcript of the Oakwood Sentinel's chat group from that same morning. We received it from a confidential informant. Brenda's heart hammered against her ribs. Her blood ran cold. She stared at the screenshots, at her own words, her own icon, typed out in black and white. It was her private conversation, the unvarnished, unfiltered thoughts of her group. It was the one place she had been completely honest about her biased assumptions. Let's look at the timeline, shall we? Davis said, his voice losing its gentle edge and taking on the precision of a surgeon. At 9:42 a.m., you post a picture of the vehicle and ask if anyone recognizes it. At 9:55 a.m., a member named Kevin Finch suggests, maybe he's just early for a meeting and on the phone. At 10:06 a.m., you take a photo of the man after he exits the car for the first time. Then, at 10:07 a.m., you write, subject is out of the vehicle, adult male, black, early 50s, dressed in a suit. This has gone from suspicious to a genuine red flag, people. Davis looked up from the page, his eyes boring into her. Ms. Hatcher, according to your own real-time account, you declared this man a genuine red flag less than 60 seconds after he stepped out of his car. You hadn't observed any systematic surveying of homes yet. You had observed a black man in a suit standing on your street. Is it not true that your suspicion was triggered by his demographic profile rather than a prolonged pattern of behavior? Brenda was speechless. Her carefully constructed narrative was crumbling. That's taken out of context, she stammered. Then let's add more context, Davis said, flipping to another page of the chat log. At 10:09 a.m., Mr. Finch again offers a benign explanation. Or he's the new owner looking at his neighborhood. To which you reply, Kevin, the house is empty. He has no legitimate reason to be here. We are past the point of giving him the benefit of the doubt. It's time to escalate. Ms. Hatcher, you didn't just observe, you actively shut down any and all alternative explanations from your own members, didn't you? You steered your group toward a conclusion of guilt from the very beginning. Brenda's face was flushed. The hunter had become the hunted. The portfolio in her lap felt like a lead weight. Now let's move on to the central part of your complaint, Davis said, his voice relentless. His hostile and intimidating behavior toward the officers. He swiveled the monitor on the table to face her. Ms. Hatcher, this is the unedited body camera footage from Officer Thompson from the moment he exited his patrol car. I want you to watch it with me. He pressed play. Brenda was forced to watch the entire scene unfold, not from her distorted, long-distance perspective, but from the objective, up-close view of the police. She saw Chief Sutton's calm face. She heard his polite, even voice. She heard the professional, respectful questions from the officers. She saw no sharp gestures. She heard no raised voices. She saw no confrontation. She saw, with sickening clarity, a perfectly normal, routine police interaction. The video reached the point where the officers realized who he was. She saw their shock, their embarrassment, and she heard Chief Sutton's calm, gracious response. No apology necessary, Officer Miller. You were responding to a call from a citizen. You were doing your job. Davis paused the video. The room was deathly silent. The only sound, the frantic pounding of Brenda's own heart. The video didn't just contradict her story, it annihilated it. It proved she was a liar. Ms. Hatcher, Davis said, his voice now cold and hard. The man you described as belligerent and hostile is seen here commending my officers for their professionalism. The officers you claimed were cowed and intimidated have both given sworn testimony that Chief Sutton was a model of compliance and that they ended the encounter because there was no basis for it. Your complaint states you witnessed a tense confrontational event. This video shows a calm, 5-minute conversation. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowed to slits. So I'm going to ask you one more time. On what basis did you file a formal complaint alleging unprofessional conduct by the Chief of Police? A complaint which, I might add, contains multiple false statements. And I will remind you that filing a false police report is a criminal offense. The threat hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Brenda Hatcher stared at the frozen image on the screen, the smiling, professional face of the man she had tried to destroy. Her intricate web of lies, her offensive defense, her entire world of self-imposed authority had been utterly and completely dismantled. She had no talking points for this, no prepared statement. The confidence she had walked in with was gone, replaced by the raw, primal fear of a cornered animal. For the first time in a very long time, Brenda Hatcher had nothing to say. The conclusion of Sergeant Davis's internal affairs report was as brutal as it was succinct. He found the complaint filed by Brenda Hatcher to be unfounded, and containing multiple statements that are demonstrably false. He concluded that the Oakwood Sentinels, under the leadership of Ms. Hatcher, acted on implicit bias rather than observable evidence, and that their actions resulted in a significant and unnecessary waste of police resources. The report, which included transcripts of the chat logs and a link to the body camera footage, was delivered to the city manager's office. It was a ticking time bomb. George Thompson read it and felt a migraine coming on. The findings were so damning, so one-sided, that there was no way to bury it. The city's legal department advised him that the report, now an official municipal document, was subject to public records requests. The media would get it eventually. The only way to manage the fallout was to get ahead of it. With a heavy sigh, he scheduled a special public hearing of the city council to address the findings of the IA report regarding citizen oversight programs. The news of the hearing spread through Oakwood like a wildfire. When the report was made public on the city's website the day before the meeting, the community imploded. The Sentinels chat group, once a bastion of smug solidarity, became a digital battlefield of finger-pointing and recrimination. Kevin Finch: "I told you all this was a mistake. I told you we were jumping to conclusions. Now look at us. We're a citywide embarrassment." Donna Gable: "This is Brenda's fault. She pushed us. She's the one who filed that insane complaint." Mark Peterson: "I'm deleting this app. I want nothing to do with this group ever again. My wife is mortified." Brenda Hatcher became a pariah overnight. The neighbors who had praised her as their protector now crossed the street to avoid her. Her phone buzzed with angry texts. The fortress she had built had crumbled, and she was buried in the rubble. She had tried to save her reputation by attacking a man's integrity, and in doing so, she had lost everything. The night of the city council hearing, the chamber was packed. News cameras lined the back wall. The residents of Oakwood filled the seats, their faces a mixture of anger, shame, and morbid curiosity. Brenda Hatcher was there, sitting alone in the front row, her face pale and drawn. She had been advised by her newly hired attorney to make a public statement of apology. It was her only hope of avoiding potential civil or even criminal charges. The meeting began. The mayor, a grim-faced woman named Eleanor Vance, called the session to order. The first item on the agenda was the IA report. The city attorney gave a brief, dry summary of the findings. Then, the floor was opened for public comment. Brenda Hatcher walked shakily to the podium. The confident, authoritative woman was gone, replaced by a diminished, fragile figure. She read from a prepared statement, her voice barely a whisper. I would like to offer my deepest, most sincere apology," she began, her eyes fixed on her paper, unable to look at the council or the crowd. "To Chief David Sutton, to the police department, and to the community. I made a terrible mistake. I allowed fear and suspicion to cloud my judgment. My actions were inexcusable, and I take full responsibility for the harm and embarrassment I have caused. The Oakwood Sentinels program was founded with good intentions, but it is clear that it became something misguided. Effective immediately, I am resigning as coordinator and disbanding the group." She finished and quickly walked back to her seat, her face burning with shame. The apology was abject, but the atmosphere in the room remained tense. An apology couldn't erase what had happened. It couldn't undo the public humiliation or the deep breach of trust. Then, Mayor Vance spoke. "The council thanks Ms. Hatcher for her statement. However, this incident has revealed a fundamental problem that goes beyond the actions of one person or one group. It raises serious questions about the nature and oversight of all Citizen Watch programs in our city. To that end, we have invited Police Chief David Sutton to address the council and propose a path forward." A hush fell over the room. All eyes turned to Chief Sutton as he approached the podium. He was not in his dress uniform, but in a simple dark suit. He looked not triumphant, but somber and resolute. He carried himself with a quiet dignity that stood in stark contrast to the chaos his presence had inadvertently caused. He was not there to gloat or to condemn. He was there to lead. The public reckoning had begun with Brenda's humiliation. It would end with the chief's vision for a new way forward. Chief David Sutton stood at the podium, a figure of calm authority in a room crackling with tension. He did not look at Brenda Hatcher. He did not address the media cameras. He spoke directly to the city council and the assembled residents, his voice steady and measured. "Good evening, Mayor Vance, members of the council, citizens," he began. "We are here tonight because of a failure of communication, a failure of perception, and a failure of trust. It would be easy to place the blame for that failure on one person or one group, but that would be a disservice to the larger issue at hand." He paused, letting his words sink in. The crowd, which had been expecting a fiery condemnation, leaned in, listening intently. Neighborhood watch programs are born from a noble impulse, the desire for a safe community, the desire of neighbors to look out for one another. That impulse should be encouraged, not extinguished. The problem arises when vigilance turns into suspicion, when observation turns into profiling, and when a desire to help turns into a desire to control. The problem is a lack of training, a lack of accountability, and a lack of partnership. He gestured to the city attorney, who began distributing a document to the council members. "What I am proposing tonight is not a condemnation, but a solution. It is a new framework for all community watch programs in this city. I call it the Community Partnership Charter, but I suspect others might give it a different name." A few people in the audience smiled, understanding the reference. The Sutton Charter, as it will likely be known, is built on 3 core principles, he explained, his voice gaining strength. First, training. No neighborhood watch group will be sanctioned by this city without its leadership and at least half its members completing a mandatory training program developed and administered by the police department. This program will cover de-escalation techniques, constitutional rights, procedural justice, and, most importantly, comprehensive anti-bias and cultural competency training. He was not just fixing a problem, he was professionalizing the very concept of a neighborhood watch. Second, oversight. Each sanctioned group will be assigned a community liaison officer from the police department. This officer will attend their meetings, provide guidance, and serve as a direct point of contact. This is not about control, it's about building a bridge. It ensures that citizen efforts are aligned with departmental policy and the rule of law. And third, he said, his voice ringing with conviction, accountability. The charter will establish a clear code of conduct for all watch groups. Any group found to have engaged in profiling, harassment, or the filing of demonstrably false reports, as determined by an impartial review process, will have its official city sanction revoked immediately. There must be consequences for the abuse of trust. He looked out at the faces in the crowd. He saw the shamed members of the former Sentinels, the angry residents, the curious onlookers. He was speaking to all of them. A badge and a uniform don't automatically make someone a good police officer, and a clipboard and a fancy group name don't automatically make someone a good community watch member. Trust is not given, it is earned. It is earned through transparency, accountability, and a shared commitment to justice for every single resident of this city, regardless of whether they have lived here for 30 years or 30 minutes. He finished his speech. For a moment, the chamber was silent. Then, a single person began to clap. It was Kevin Finch. Soon, he was joined by another, then another, until the entire room, with the exception of the still-frozen Brenda Hatcher, erupted in a sustained, heartfelt, standing ovation. They weren't just clapping for the plan, they were clapping for the man. They were clapping for his grace, his wisdom, and his refusal to descend into bitterness. He had been wronged, and his response was not to seek revenge, but to build a better system. Mayor Vance called for order, a wide smile on her face. "Thank you, Chief Sutton. I believe I speak for the entire council when I say that your proposal is not only welcome, but essential. She turned to her fellow council members. I'd like to put forth a motion for the immediate ratification of the Community Partnership Charter as presented by the Chief of Police. The motion was seconded instantly. The vote was unanimous. The Sutton Charter was now the law of the land in their city. The hearing concluded. As people filed out, a line formed to shake Chief Sutton's hand. He accepted their gratitude with humility. He had faced his first major crisis as chief, a crisis born of personal insult and public humiliation, and he had emerged not just unscathed, but stronger. He had transformed a moment of ugly prejudice into a legacy of positive, systemic reform. He had shown the city what true leadership looked like, not in a uniform or a patrol car, but in the heart and mind of a man committed to serving his entire community. The aftermath of the public hearing was swift and decisive. The Oakwood Sentinels were officially a memory, a cautionary tale whispered at neighborhood barbecues. The group chat was deleted, a digital ghost town. Brenda Hatcher and her husband put their house on the market a month later and moved to a different county, seeking the anonymity they had once so fervently denied to others. A quiet, almost palpable sense of peace settled over the manicured lawns and silent streets of West Oakwood. Under the new Sutton Charter, a different kind of neighborhood watch began to form. It was smaller, less formal, and led by the one person who had been a voice of reason from the beginning, Kevin Finch. Their first official act was not to report a suspicious car, but to organize a block party to welcome the new families on the street, including the Suttons. Chief Sutton and his wife Sarah attended, not as officials, but as neighbors. He flipped burgers at the grill, laughed with the other dads about lawn care, and listened to an elderly resident's concerns about traffic. He was, for the first time, simply David, the guy who lived in the old Carlton place. He was no longer a subject or a symbol. He was part of the community. The wound that had been opened by suspicion was beginning to heal through the simple act of human connection. The change was felt not just in Oakwood, but across the city. The charter became a model for other communities, a blueprint for how to channel civic energy in a positive, inclusive direction. Chief Sutton's reputation soared. He was seen as a reformer, a thoughtful and resilient leader who had faced down prejudice with professionalism and grace. His first crisis had, ironically, cemented his legacy before he had even fully begun his work. He had inherited a mess not of his own making and had used it as a foundation to build something better, something stronger, something that would protect not just property, but the principles of a just society. He had shown his new city that true security doesn't come from building walls of suspicion, but from opening doors of understanding. In the quiet moments after a storm, reflection offers a clarity that the chaos itself can never provide. Looking back, it becomes possible to trace the intricate web of fear and ego that led to that sun-drenched confrontation on Sycamore Lane. What drove Brenda Hatcher? It wasn't simple malice. It was something more insidious, a deep-seated fear of losing control, masked by a rigid, aggressive interpretation of safety. Perhaps she came from a background where the world felt unpredictable and dangerous, and her meticulously ordered subdivision was her fortress against that chaos. In her mind, the unfamiliar was not just unknown, it was a hostile force. Her group was not a neighborhood watch. It was an echo chamber that validated her anxieties, transforming her personal fears into a collective mandate. Chief Sutton, by his very presence, a successful black man who did not fit into her narrow archetype of who belonged in her world, represented a direct threat to that ordered reality. His existence challenged her control. If she had been able to pause, to listen to the dissenting voices in her own group, to see the man on the street as a potential neighbor instead of a probable threat, the entire tragedy could have been averted. And what of Chief Sutton? If he had been less composed, less secure in his own identity, would the outcome have been different? If he hadn't possessed that core of steel forged by 30 years of navigating complex, often biased systems, Perhaps he would have reacted with anger at being questioned on his own property. What if he had immediately announced his title, using his authority as a shield? The encounter would have ended sooner, but the underlying disease of prejudice in the community would have remained untreated. His victory was born not just from the injustice of the moment, but from a lifetime of learned discipline. His calm, professional compliance was not an act of submission, but a strategic choice. He understood that in the face of irrationality, the most powerful weapon is unshakable reason. The incident reminds us that the most dangerous threats to a community often come not from the outside, but from the fears that fester within. It shows how the modern tools of communication, like a simple group chat, can become powerful engines for division and paranoia when not guided by wisdom and empathy. It's a testament to the fact that one person's unwavering commitment to principle can expose a systemic flaw and create a legacy of progress for thousands who follow. What do you think is the most important lesson from Chief Sutton's story? Have you ever witnessed a situation where an echo chamber turned a simple misunderstanding into a crisis? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and please support our channel so we can continue to bring you these important stories.